Good morning, everybody. I'm Warren Hogue, IPI's Senior Advisor for External Relations, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this workshop on combating piracy, experiences in the Gulf of Guinea, Horn of Africa, and Southeast Asia, co-hosted by IPI and the permanent missions to the United Nations of Benin and of Australia. As your invitation indicated, today's event builds upon the outcomes of the Counter-Piracy Conference this past July in Perth, which brought together participants from more than 59 countries and organizations from the 3 affected regions. IPI has held 10 events over the past 3 years in which piracy, once thought to be a quaint and antiquated subject, something for the movies or for children's books, was exposed as the very contemporary and very dangerous and often very violent phenomenon that it has now become. But the focus of those IPI meetings was almost completely on the attention-getting and alarming piracy off the coast of Somalia. Indeed, the titles of the officials and outside representatives who spoke here illustrated that point. I have in mind Jack Lang, who at the time of his appearance here in January 2011 was the special advisor of the Secretary General on legal issues related to piracy off the coast of Somalia. And last November, we hosted the contact group on piracy off the coast of Somalia on the eve of the passage of Security Council Resolution 2020, expressing deep concern at the ongoing threat posed by piracy and armed robbery in that area. But as we will hear today in some detail, piracy has now spread to other regions. And in that connection, last November, in response to a request from the Republic of Benin, the Secretary General dispatched an assessment mission to West Africa. That mission eventually led to the adoption this past February of Resolution 2039, which encouraged the states and regional groups in West Africa and their international partners to develop maritime coordination centers and build greater capacity to combat the threat in that area. And as I mentioned, Australia hosted the Perth Conference this summer that dealt with this larger picture and prepared the ground for today's event. So we at IPI are indebted to the missions of Benin and Australia for lifting our gaze and quite literally expanding our horizons. As you will hear, the piracy in the Strait of Malacca is on a different order than that in the Horn of Africa or that in the Gulf of Guinea. But whether the attacks in the 3 areas are coordinated and well orchestrated, the need for a response that is coherent at the national, regional, and international levels. We have a first-rate panel here to address the subject, and their names and full biographies are in the papers attached to the list of participants that you have. To introduce them and to launch our conversation, I'm happy to turn this over now to the 2 chairs of this meeting, Jean-Francis Régis Zanzou, Permanent Representative of the Republic of Benin to the UN, and Gary Francis Quinlan, the Permanent Representative of Australia. Ambassadors, the floor is yours.
Good morning, and on behalf of the Australian mission, I just want to welcome everybody here. I'm not going to say a great deal because there's more expertise up here on the panel than me, and I might contribute in some humble way later on when we get to the Q&A session, I think, and all the rest of it. I just wanted to pass on 1 or 2 things. I want to thank IPI and Warren for all the assistance, as always, of course. It's always a delight to be here doing events. I particularly want to thank our co-sponsor here, of course, Ambassador Jean-Francis Zanzou, who's current chair of the AU and who personally has brought the issue of piracy, particularly, of course, in West Africa and the new focus on Gulf of Guinea as well as elsewhere, into the Security Council and very clearly onto our agenda, and thank you for that. I will introduce each of the speakers one by one as we begin, but I should just perhaps orient ourselves by just quickly flagging who is up here, in fact. And starting from right down there on the left, on the right, my right, I want to welcome Lieutenant Commander Nicholas Teo, who's Deputy Director of the Information Sharing Centre for Combating Piracy and Armed Robbery against Ships in Asia. then am looking through this, yes, Major General Charles Okai, who's the Director of Peacekeeping and Regional Security in ECOWAS, Jean-Francis, me, Ambassador Barry Faure, who's Secretary of State in the Office of the President of the Seychelles, and particularly thank you coming such short notice, and Peter Jennings, who's the Executive Director of the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. And Peter is going to talk shortly about the results of the Conference on Piracy in Perth. Apart from that, look, I won't actually take up your time. Oh, sorry, Alan Cole, yes, as well, who is the who unfortunately we haven't got space up here to have Alan sit as well, but Alan will be coming up and speaking and helping us run the discussion when we move into the Q&A period. And Alan, of course, is the Counter-Piracy Program Coordinator in the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. So thank you, Alan, as well. Jean-Francis, do you want to kick us off?
Definitely. Thank you, Gary. I thank you very much. I thank the Australian government for having responded so positively to our initiative, our joint initiative to have this event here in New York after the International Conference on Counter-Piracy, which was held in Perth. I thought the good ideas that I met there could be shared with the public here in New York, and I thank you very much for having responded positively to this suggestion. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the government of Australia for offering me this invaluable opportunity to co-chair this high-level meeting on counter-piracy as a follow-up of the International Counter-Piracy event, which we held mid-August in Perth. The year 2011 went in history as a year of upsurge of piracy cases off the coast of Gulf of Guinea. You may recall that taking into account this upsurge, the President of the Republic of Benin, His Excellency Dr. Boni Yayi, seized the Council and especially addressed a letter to the heads of governments and head of state and of government of permanent members of the Security Council and to the Secretary General, requesting them to take action to prevent piracy to strangulate the economy of Benin. President Yayi did that because he had extensive consultations with member states of the region, and the idea they shared together was that there should be an action at international level, because at that time piracy brought to a two-third drop of the number of ships docking at the port of Cotonou, which is the heart of the economy of Benin, providing up to 55% of our revenue yearly. So, acting on the basis of his request of assistance, the Security Council took swift action. After a debate in the Security Council mid-October, 19 October, it adopted a resolution 2018 on 31st of October 2011, and in compliance with this resolution, the Secretary General dispatched an assessment mission to Benin. I'm happy to see here one member of that mission, which spent almost 1 month in the region assessing the situation in the region. During the negotiations which were held in the Security Council, we had 2 resolutions, and what is specific for those resolutions are that they were initiated by the countries of the Gulf of Guinea. It was not just a resolution taken by the Security Council. It was a resolution that we prepared in which we feed in our philosophy, our regional approach to the issue. And it is what happened when we were adopting under the chairmanship of Nigeria, the first resolution, which was 2018. On the basis of the findings of the mission assessment mission, we had a second resolution, which so to say integrated the recommendations of that assessment mission, taking into account our own perspective of the issue. To reach this resolution, I was coordinating, liaising between the group Gulf of Guinea countries who made me the honor to appoint me as their coordinator, and with African delegations in the Security Council to really have something that corresponds to our vision, because we wanted to make a difference between the situation in Somalia, where there is no, so to say, interlocutor at state level to deal with the matter, and the difference here is that we have governments which are ready to take their responsibilities and who were just requesting an assistance for that. So the approach was a little bit different, and this different approach was, so to say, incorporated in the resolution 2039, which was adopted under the chairmanship of Togo, a member of the region, at the Security Council. In the second resolution, the Security Council recognized the urgent need to devise and adopt an effective and practical measures to counter terrorism and armed robbery at sea in the Gulf of Guinea. And also one issue of difference that I would like to draw your attention here on was the qualification of crimes committed in the Gulf of Guinea as piracy. It was a big issue to have, so to say, common view on that, because some countries were still considering that what was happening there in Gulf of Guinea was not according to the legal definition of piracy, so to say, acts of piracy, but rather robbery at sea and things that has to be taken up by the national state. So we found a very comprehensive approach to the issue by talking about piracy off the coast and armed robbery. So it's under this title that we are working, and the resolution stressed the primary responsibility of the states of the Gulf of Guinea to counter piracy and armed robbery at sea in the Gulf of Guinea. And in this context, it urged the regional organizations which were involved, ECAS and ECOWAS and Gulf of Guinea Commission, to work together to convene the planned joint summit, because we were working, I will say, in advance with the US and other development partners to work out a regional strategy, and this work, which was done in New York, feed into that. But to finalize this, we need to finalize the drafts, so to say, global draft regional comprehensive strategy, which was being elaborated between ECAS and ECOWAS. And I will say Gulf of Guinea has its own track of tackling the issue, but now we have to bring those three organizations together to conclude the work that was initiated on having a regional strategy, and the Security Council backed this process, which is still going on. The Council requested the Secretary General through the United Nations Office in West Africa and the United Nations Office in Central Africa, UNOWA and UNOCA, to support states and sub-regional organizations in convening that joint summit, as referenced in Resolution 2011. It also urged the states of the region of the Gulf of Guinea to take prompt action at national, regional level with the support of the international community, where able and by mutual agreement to develop and implement national maritime security strategies, including establishment of legal frameworks, and that is very important, legal framework of for the prevention, because it's a lack of policing at the field, at the ground, that allows piracy to develop off the coast, and also to take measures for the repression of piracy and armed robbery at sea, as well as the prosecution of persons engaging in those crimes and the punishment of those convicted of those crimes, and encourages regional cooperation in this regard. Benin has the chance to be the neighbor of a regional power endowed with considerable naval capacities. Both Nigeria and Benin were able to agree very quickly in July, from July to September, to launch a joint patrols program in the off the coast of Benin, and this helps stabilize stabilize the situation very quickly. In the meantime, Benin was able to build its own logistic capacity to fight piracy. We had 2 boats that we received from China, which were not very, very costly to maintain, but were not in function for some time. We were able to, so to say, renovate those boats. And in addition, from that at the time of July 2011 to March of this year, we were able to acquire 3 new patrol vessels, which are operating now in the region. And with this, we really developed our own national capacity to take control of the situation in the Gulf of Guinea. And it's working because we have a strategy in place to gather the ships and to secure them 24/7. To secure them, so to say, protection for 24/7, and this is running well, correctly. And I would like to use this stage to thank the government of China, the U.S. government, and the French government who provided the 3 ships that we bought to, and also many other governments which were there providing know-how, technological, so to say, training to be able to capacitate our navy to really take control of the situation in the Gulf, in the Benin Gulf, I would say, a part of Gulf of Guinea. As regards the regional summit, it is supposed to bring together the head of states of I would say 2 RECs, 2 regional economic communities, ECAS and ECOWAS, is still in preparation. It is obvious that the situation of Mali and in the, so to say, Sahel has overshadowed this process and has, so to say, pushed it at a second degree of priority now, but we hope that very soon we will bring this issue forward to really adopt a comprehensive regional strategy to deal with this, because it's by mutualizing our means that we as a state in the region can take control of this situation. As the coordinator of the Gulf of Guinea permanent representatives, I was invited to attend the Perth conference, and I took a real delight in really understanding the scope of the phenomena and of the phenomenon and the actions that were devised in 3 different regions to tackle it, in Southeast Asia, in the Indian Ocean, off the coast of Somalia, and also what we were trying to do in the Gulf of Guinea. We really came together with experts, generals, admirals, to really share our knowledge about this, and this is very important to really increase our capacity to cope with different aspects of the phenomena. And I was very impressed by the level of organization which was reached in Southeast Asia with the establishment of an information sharing center, working in real time to provide information on situations and also cooperating to tackle with the challenges, So I hope that this event will help us address the pending issues, and one of the pending issues is the failing of an international, so to say, body to deal with the issue in the Gulf of Guinea. We would really like to have a situation where we have a contact group for the Gulf of Guinea counter-piracy initiatives to support the work of the governments there. And I hope that we could really address all pending issues and also really see how the experience of the 3 regions, Indian Ocean, Southeast Asia, and Gulf of Guinea, could, so to say, be brought together to really increase our capacity to eliminate, I would say, this scourge and promote maritime security. I thank you, and I think that I will return back the floor to my good friend, Gary.
Oops. Okay. Thank you very much, Jean-Francis. As I indicated at the opening, we have 5 panelists today, and we quite can't fit them all on the podium, but Alan will address us from the podium over here on the left. I apologise for the fact that we don't have much gender balance up here today. We did try, I have to say, but 1 or 2 individuals were too busy doing their jobs actually to sort of actually come to New York, doing their jobs in the region, and they weren't free to participate. But we do have the right kind of spread, I think, particularly from ECOWAS as well. Our first panellist is Peter Jennings, who's currently Executive Director of the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, which is a think tank based in Canberra, which provides independent analysis and advice on defence issues in particular, but strategic issues more broadly as they affect Australia and the region and beyond. And it was established about 5, 6, 7 years ago now, I guess, and has become a very effective player in thinking and development of thinking in Australia on these issues. Prior to taking up his position at ASPI, as it's known, Peter was Deputy Secretary for Strategy in the Australian Department of Defence and has held a lot of very key positions in that department, both at the strategic think level and also operationally in various aspects of the operations of our defence partners. Peter was also chairman of the Perth Conference, and he's going to take us through an overview of the outcomes of that conference, and later on he will provide a summary of the discussion this morning as well. Peter.
Well, Gary, thanks so much. I'm never too busy to turn down an invitation to come to New York, so I'm delighted to be here. Warren, thanks for the IPI for hosting, and as Gary indicated, it was my pleasure to chair the Perth Counter-Piracy Conference. For those of you who don't know Perth, it's the Paris of Western Australia. And as Warren indicated, 100 delegates from some 59 countries and organisations deeply involved in the business of counter-piracy. What was interesting and in some respects unique about Perth was the comparative work done to look at the three principal sources or three principal areas of piracy as a problem at the moment. Southeast Asia, the Somali coast and the Gulf of Guinea. And I do believe that some interesting lessons came forward from pooling experiences in those three areas. So I'll set out what those lessons are, or at least my attempt to highlight those lessons briefly this morning. Now, I should note that a summary of the conference proceedings was produced by my organisation, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. You should have a copy of that there. And there is also a background note provided, which is based on our report. I draw your attention to the first table in the background note on page 2, which scopes out the dimensions of the international problem. You will see that the International Maritime Bureau identified some 439 actual and attempted piracy attacks in 2011 and a further 177 in the first half of this year. Three regions accounted for the majority of these actual and attempted attacks in this year: 48 in Southeast Asia, 69 off the Horn of Africa and 32 off West Africa and the Gulf of Guinea. Now, the causes and the nature of the problem does vary to some extent between regions. In Southeast Asia, the global financial crisis put many ships at anchor, particularly in the eastern approaches to the Straits of Malacca. These vessels are more vulnerable to acts of crime at sea. And there is also what seems to be a viable trade in stealing, repainting and reselling tugboats. Piracy, however, has declined in Southeast Asia in recent years thanks to effective cooperation between key states, practical operational and information sharing between monitoring and enforcement agencies. Off the Somali coast, a lack of onshore governance and deep economic hardship has allowed the growth of piracy centred around ransoming ships and their crews. The fact that Somali pirates can find safe anchorages for their captive vessels sustains this pirate business model, which has attracted organised criminal support. However, the good news is that in recent months there has been a significant fall-off in reported incidents, but this could well increase with the end of the Western monsoon season. In the Gulf of Guinea, piracy seems to take the form of theft of oil and other cargoes. This is a sophisticated and well-organised activity involving dodging tax and other revenues, other state revenues, and the on-selling of oil. So, to some of the lessons from the Perth workshop, and in a very short space of time, I would like to mention 10 highlights from the conference. The first of which is perhaps an obvious thing to say, but often they're the most important things. Trust building in international cooperation is really essential. As my colleague Nicholas Teo from Singapore pointed out at the conference, building trust between organisations and states is the essential starting point for cooperation on counter-piracy matters. It is the basis of any successful national and regional approach. And if one starts to consider the essential elements of building trust in an organisation, you can see that it is built around information sharing and in developing accepted common procedures for action. A good example here is the work of Southeast Asia's Regional Cooperation Agreement on combating piracy against ships at sea, or RECAP, which is where Nicholas operates. And he'll soon tell us about how this agreement has ultimately brought about the coordinated reduction of pirate attacks in Southeast Asia. Second takeaway from Perth is the essentiality of strengthening national capacities to combat counter-piracy. Piracy is most effective where there is an absence of national capability. And effective international cooperation is really based on the capacities of individual states to manage their internal jurisdictions. Australia has developed some significant effort in recent years to strengthening state capacities of a number of countries in the Indian Ocean region and in Africa. This can be seen in areas of building effective legal frameworks, or of running seaworthy vessels, or in establishing information sharing procedures, all essential to strengthening the rule of law at sea. Third takeaway from Perth, effective action at sea begins on land. The Perth Conference found that it's most often the case that piracy flourishes as a subset of criminal activity on land. So effective port and anchorage security acts to reduce incidents of crime at sea. Similarly, effective regimes to control fisheries management dramatically reduces grey legal areas where criminal activities can flourish. Fourth point, international cooperation is an essential requirement to handle cross-national problems. A good example here is the common maritime patrolling which has been occurring between some states in the Gulf of Guinea, as Jean-Francis mentioned. Although this sounds obvious, it can only take place where there is an established body of operational procedures between organisations. The good news is that exercises and training can help to establish these shared approaches and frameworks. Fifth lesson, strengthening information sharing internationally is critical. A common operating picture is the essential basis for effective counter-piracy strategy. The Perth Conference found that the Southeast Asian model was highly effective in preventing pirates operating at the extreme edges of national legal jurisdictions. So in any region facing this challenge, establishing a common operating picture for countries and agencies is critical. Lesson 6, it's important to understand the links to organised crime. Really, piracy is a part of an organised crime business model. The problem has to be addressed at a variety of levels, not just at sea. Piracy should be seen as an element of organised crime and treated as such. Seventh point is about coast guards. It's important for navies or for separate Coast Guard organisations to have the necessary legal and organisational structures to do their jobs. An interesting finding at Perth was that it's often sub-national organisations rather than navies which can be most effective in building the habits of cooperation. It was thought perhaps because there's less political pressure on these organisations than on navies to work together. Lesson 8 is about the importance of developing workable legal frameworks to prosecute pirates. This has been a major international challenge. Australia has seen that it is an important international priority to build legal and enforcement capabilities to support effective prosecutions against those apprehended for acts of piracy or crime at sea. We've seen important developments in places like the Seychelles, to name one country in that area. But this is, I cannot stress enough, a critical factor to prevent what people in my Navy refer to as the policy of catch and release for apprehending pirates. Lesson 9, promoting best practice in the international shipping industry is important. And significant progress has been made in the areas of what it is that ships need to do in order to be safe at sea. More work needs to be done to build compliance around those procedures, and we also need to address areas perhaps not often considered, such as safety strategies for non-commercial vessels, such as yachts. There's also a need, I think, for a more broadly shared international approach on the use of private sector security personnel on commercial vessels, which is an increasingly frequent phenomenon. Last lesson, and again a very interesting conclusion from Perth, is the need to consider assistance to captured seafarers and their families. We need to do more. Many hundreds of seafarers are currently being held hostage by pirates for ransom. And they and their families are really the forgotten casualties of this international problem. There is little or no support for these people, and I think more could be done internationally to address that situation. Ladies and gentlemen, I came away from the Perth conference with the impression that good progress has been made in developing counter-piracy strategies. This is an area where regional and international solutions can be developed. I would encourage you all to keep a focus on this issue and to see how regional and international cooperation can be strengthened to reduce the problem of piracy wherever it may arise. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Our next panellist is a retired Singapore Senior Naval Officer, Nicholas Teo, who is currently Deputy Director of the Information Sharing Centre under what's called the Regional Cooperation Agreement on Combating Piracy and Armed Robbery Against Ships in Asia, RECAP. Nicholas has held this position since the founding, I think, of RECAP back in, or the launch back in 2006. So it's had 6 years of operations, and so far it has 18 contracting parties who are involved, and it in fact is the first government-to-government agreement that addresses the incidents of piracy and armed robbery in that region in Asia. Nicholas has been asked to talk about regional cooperation in Southeast Asia to give us an example of how that problem has been tackled there. So Nicholas, over to you. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Excellencies and ladies and gentlemen, good morning to all. Well, first I must say I'm a bit overwhelmed. Well, thanks for the invitation and opportunity to share with you the Asian Initiative, which was that came into force since the 4th of September of 2006 to address the challenges of combating piracy and armed robbery in Asia. The Regional Cooperation Agreement on Combating Piracy and Armed Robbery, RECAP, well, that's a mouthful. Well, it's basically we are the first regional government-to-government agreement to promote and enhance cooperation against piracy and armed robbery against ships in Asia. And the Information Sharing Centre, which is part of the agreement, is now based in Singapore, and it's headed by the Executive Director, currently Mr. Yoshihisa Endo from Japan. He's on a 3-year term. And is staffed by both local and foreign officers, most of which are with naval, coast guard, or law enforcement background. This is most useful because it is from their presence and working within the center that we can establish very quick information exchange and flow on a daily basis. And I think you can appreciate that when you have someone who has this common language and who to call, and putting a face behind each of the program, it can facilitate the flow of information from there. The RECAP ISC was formally launched on the 29th of November 2006, and like mentioned earlier, we are already in the 6th year of operation. While the information sharing is the key pillar of the center, we do focus a fair bit of our programs on capacity building and cooperative arrangement, which actually forms the basis and form of our daily operation. I'll elaborate this as we go along. But more importantly, the key principle that we take into consideration in all our program is the respect for national sovereignty. I think this is the essence that the countries that are with us now are more willing to cooperate and to work together, is that we take into consideration the national sovereignty issues into all our programs. And it is for this very reason that we are information sharing center and not an operational center. Because in the term of operational center, we orchestrate response. But in the case of information sharing center, we provide all the necessary information. We assist the focal point to link up, and each of the focal point will manage their incidents in accordance to the national policies. The RECAP ISC also provides the appropriate and timely report to trigger focal points. Now, focal points are agencies that each of the government or state has appointed to be the national point of contact. And it is from these focal points that we operate all our information, collaborate with them, and share information with them. And it is through this that we actually identify operational gaps, and where necessary, we will assist the focal point to link them, to bridge them, be it with another focal point or with the commercial entity. To date, as mentioned earlier, the RECAP networks has 18 contracting parties, 4 of which are actually beyond the Asian region. We have Denmark, the Netherlands, Norway, and the United Kingdom, who joined us in the last 2 years, as a good percentage of their commercial entities actually operate within the Asian region. And being within the network, they get the first-hand appreciation of the picture at sea. At the same time, they will also provide the necessary linkage should their ship get into any kind of situation with the regional focal point. To recap, this is a plus because we have more eyes and ears at sea who will help spread the communication network, at the same time provide the necessary feedback. When a state becomes a party to the agreement, a governor will be appointed to represent the state of that country, which will provide, they'll be part of the governing council that provide the guidance and direction for the RECAP ISC, who forms as a secretariat for the governing council. Each of these parties will also designate the government agency to be their national focal point. Now, this can be Coast Guard, Navies, Marine Police, port authorities. We do not dictate to the state which are the agencies concerned because it's no one glove fit all. In some countries, the Coast Guard has that particular role, whereas in some it's the Navy or even the port authorities. So this is something that each of the contracting parties will have to work out to be their national focal point. I will say that the focal point is actually the strength of the whole RECAPSAT network, because it is from here that under the obligation of the agreement, we have the first step is to take inter-ministry coordination. Now, this is not a given thing, unfortunately, because most agencies actually operates very much within themselves. So by coming on board, the first linkage is actually inter-ministry coordination, where, for example, if the Navy is taking charge of being designated as the focal point, then they will have to link up with the police, who probably will be facilitate the law enforcement part and for investigation, or with Coast Guard agencies that may be doing search and rescue coordination to receive information flow and so forth. So this is actually the starting point for any of the states that come on board, is to get the inter-ministry coordination part in place. Well, aside from working with government agency, I think the focal point, we also gave a second order, and they have to work with the commercial sector. This is where the flow information comes into play. More often than not, the law enforcement will see things from their perspective, but the commercial, who is actually the guy at sea, is seeing it from a very different perspective. So this is where we require the focal point to link up with the respective commercial sector, be it the marine insurance company, the ship owners, or even just a guy who do fishery. It is from this feedback and their rapport that actually strengthen the flow of information. The key message that we have been sending to all both law enforcement and the commercial entities that no one agency can suppress piracy alone. And therefore, the commercial part will also have to take some form of ownership in taking the first lines of preventive action in looking after themselves, and more importantly, to report the incidents. While the programs facilitate the linkage of these two, we also in parallel works with partner organizations such as the IMO, Shipping Association like BIMCO, Intertanko, and Ship Owner Forum, so that we get some collective form of feedback, at the same time dissemination of information, and to jointly address the issues at hand, especially those that have mutual interests. On the law enforcement side, of course, the three most important is the Navy, Coast Guard, and the police. The police network is something that we are working towards now to have an MOU with Interpol, and actually have one scheduled in November to be signed in Rome. And with the Navy, we are actually linking up with the Information Fusion Center, which under the WPNS, the Western Naval Symposium Group, that has a setup also in Singapore that links up the Navy's pictures in maritime security. And within Asia, we also have linked up with the Coast Guard network under the head of Asian Coast Guard Agency, or HAGM for short. So all this network actually help to facilitate the linkages we have with law enforcement. At the same time, with the partner organization, the commercial entity, we try to amalgamate these both interests together. On the regional side, we also worked with for example, the Asian Maritime Forum, the Asian Pacific Head of Maritime Safety Agency, and of course the IMO under the Maritime Safety Committee meeting, which takes place 6 monthly. And this is to align, to make sure that whatever programs or whatever feedback we have is aligned with the national part of the concern at that point in time. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think the threat to our seafarers and economy from piracy and armed robbery can extrapolate itself very quickly if left unchecked. And it is from here that this part on acknowledging that no one state or agency can do it alone, we therefore need to collaborate, to cooperate, and to communicate and put our program in place now, so that in the eventuality that something comes up, the people that are involved are actually the same guy wearing the different hat, but still addressing the same issue, that we can do it together. And with the key message to them that we can make the difference. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. And I want to welcome our third panellist now, Ambassador Barry Faure, who's here on my left. I also want to welcome the new Seychelles Permanent Representative as well, Marie-Louise Potter, who's been able to join us today. So welcome very much also. Barry is currently Secretary of State in the Office of the President of the Republic of the Seychelles. He's been a Member of Parliament elected 3 times, I think, in the past, and also has held very senior positions in the civil service, including as Principal Secretary for Foreign Affairs. I'm sure people know that Seychelles has taken a very robust position on anti-piracy in the Indian Ocean. They actually open fire occasionally. This is what we mean by robustness, but also in prosecutions and the development of the intelligence sharing related to prosecutions and all the rest of it. Australia, in fact, I think is completing a detainee transfer arrangement with Seychelles fairly soon to provide some assistance as well. And I would notice overnight, in fact, a press release from the Ministry of Home Affairs and Transport of Seychelles, see, I read everything, which indicates that the Seychelles have now joined the combined maritime forces, in fact, to combat piracy in the region, which is the first small island state which has been brought into that 25-member arrangement. So, Barry, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Excellency, for this introduction. Ambassador Quinlan, Ambassador Zazou, Mr. Hogue, colleague panelists, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I would first like to start by expressing our regret that we missed the opportunity to participate in the Perth Counter-Piracy Conference. And it is for this very reason that we felt that it was important that we send somebody from the capital to participate in this the counter-piracy workshop here in New York, for which I would like to thank both the Australian mission and the Benin mission for having put it together and for the invitation. Otherwise, it is our new permanent representative who would have very well represented Seychelles here in the panel. It gives me great pleasure to share Seychelles' experience of countering piracy in the Indian Ocean. For an island state such as Seychelles, piracy could completely isolate us. Of course, the impacts which the scourge has inflicted on our population of only 89,000 inhabitants have been tremendous. The ocean is the lifeline of our small and fragile economy, which is focused primarily on tourism and fisheries. The worst part of my job is to talk about piracy, therefore, because I also chair the Seychelles Tourism Board, and my job is to attract tourists to Seychelles as well, and not to therefore speak about things which would scare the tourists. But it is a reality. It is a reality that is affecting our industry. Fortunately, not land-based tourism, but tourism, the offshore marine-based tourism, such as the cruise shipping industry, the yachting industry, fly fishing. The Americans like to go to the Seychelles to do fly fishing, for instance. That has been affected significantly. When the two sectors of our economy, tourism and fisheries, therefore underperform, the impacts touch all households. The amount of cruise ships and other vessels which now visit Seychelles have decreased remarkably. Fishing has been transformed from a way of life for us to become a high-risk activity. This impact on the local price of fish and marine products has meant that the price of these basic necessities have skyrocketed over the last 2 years. We currently have two Seychellois fishermen, Rolly Tambara and Marc Songrois, who have been held in Somalia now for 346 days, and we are still negotiating. We have had to take drastic measures, including deploying vessel protection detachments on all local vessels. Without them, our fishing industry would grind to a halt. Yet the safety of our waters cannot fully rest on such mechanisms. Our people cannot fully exploit our other natural oceanic resources to the fullest. We have said from the outset that the fight against piracy is an issue of the law being respected by one and all. It is about creating the right conditions for the rule of law in Somalia. It is about creating the right conditions for the rule of law at sea. International cooperation has improved immensely in dealing with piracy and in reducing insecurity. Here, I would like to underline the constructive role that many in the international community have played, from the UN to the EU, the USA, China, India, Norway, UAE, and Australia, to name but a few. But we are still paying a lot. The insurance costs are astronomical, and the cost of deploying multinational military forces in the region cannot be sustained indefinitely. We need to mainstream the respect of law and order in the Indian Ocean. Seychelles has played a key role in ensuring that the impunity associated with piracy is ended. We have signed and ratified the relevant international conventions. We have signed and ratified multilateral and bilateral agreements, and we have changed our criminal laws in this regard. By the 20th September 2012, Seychelles had in its prison 103 pirates, which represent a quarter of our prison population. We have prosecuted pirates that we have arrested through our own Coast Guard, as well as pirates that have been arrested by partner nations that are active in the region. On the 29th of March 2012, 17 Somali convicted of acts of piracy were repatriated to Somalia to serve their sentence. We believe such transfers are a key component of bringing law and order to Somalia and law and order in the Indian Ocean. We have signed transfer agreements with the federal government of Somalia, as well as with the autonomous regions of Somaliland and Puntland. And we are working with the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime to properly establish a justice cycle which responds to the security needs of the whole region, while building capacity in Somalia itself. We cannot do it without Somalia. And we also cannot do it unless the international community becomes more proactive in the final part of the equation, which involves repatriation of the convicts to serve their term in Somalia. We anticipate having the transfer of another 40 pirates to Somalia before the end of 2012. Ending impunity also required us to look beyond prosecution of just the pirates themselves, but also of the organizers of piracy activity. Piracy has, in fact, become a transnational crime, organized in a way which is not dissimilar to drug trafficking or human trafficking. Targeting the financiers and orchestrators of piracy is not an easy undertaking, as it implies us infiltrating a business model that is becoming more and more sophisticated. Towards this end, the Seychelles and UK governments are jointly developing the Regional Anti-Piracy Prosecutions Intelligence Coordination Center, RAPIC. The center is now in its construction phase in Seychelles. This shall function as a central mechanism which will develop evidentiary packages from dispersed sources such as Interpol, Europol, the Indian Ocean Commission, and between other countries on bilateral and multilateral levels. By ensuring that appropriate intelligence is shared in the global community, we can widen the net to catch those that are continuously financing these activities. Piracy has benefited from the void that often exists in terms of clear and effective mechanisms for international ocean governance in the Indian Ocean. As we are seeing in the Gulf of Guinea, wherever such a void exists, there will be opportunists that try to profit. The problems we are encountering in Somalia could unfortunately also be replicated elsewhere. The world is often slow to realize how much they depend on the oceans and maritime trade for normal life to take place. Over 2/3 of the world's shipped oil cargo goes through the Indian Ocean. Despite Seychelles' small size, we have expressed our determination to work with all partners to strengthen the capacity of our region to implement better oceanic governance. This is one of the reasons we have also announced our intention to stand for a non-permanent seat at the UN Security Council for the year 2017. Stronger and more effective oceanic governance is one of the most important considerations in the development of what has been termed the blue economy. In concluding, I would like to thank the Australian government for its own commitment towards strengthening and mainstreaming oceanic governance, particularly in the Indian Ocean, an ocean that we share. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barry, and thank you for those words at the end. I have to say, at one area which the Security Council, if a country were ever elected to it, of course, which does seem to us to require a bit more attention, is precisely the area of maritime security. I mean, the issues are coming onto the agenda, have come onto the agenda, but in a sort of reactive way, slightly ad hoc. And I think a number of countries have been talking for a little while how we might actually have the Council look a little in a more articulated way at the whole range of issues, in fact, that impact on maritime security. Our next panellist, the fourth panellist, is Major General Charles Okai, who is Director of Peacekeeping and Regional Security for ECOWAS. Has been, I think, for the last 6 years. Prior to that, was Director of Defence and Security in ECOWAS, so has worked with ECOWAS and the regional focus for a long time. A very distinguished career in the Ghana Armed Forces as Chief of Staff and Director General of Operations, and also as a peacekeeper, particularly in Lebanon in UNIFIL. So brings a very wide range of both regional and peacekeeping experience and operational experience to the job. We're very pleased to have General Okai here at relatively short notice, I have to say, so thank you for being available. And of course, he's representing the ECOWAS Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security. We've asked General Okai to talk about the work that ECOWAS has underway in relation to the Gulf of Guinea in particular. So, General Okai.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Your Excellency, for your kind words. And I also appreciate your noble initiative in pioneering this aspect of the challenge on the sea. I must say up front that West Africa is the most endowed Gulf region or endowed with sea assets, but the least developed in the management of these assets. My remarks may not be able to give you any new ideas like my colleague from Asia has said, or our brother from Seychelles. That is why I believe when the president of Benin was confronted with the problem of this piracy, he did not throw up his arms in vain or hopelessly, but went all the way to the UN. If we were blessed with some regional groupings or management assets in the region, maybe we would have tried to do something about it, like we are doing for peacekeeping in other countries. So it is a real problem for us in the region, and we are here to learn from our colleagues. But there is political commitment on the part of our leaders. So at the 40th session of the Authority of ECOWAS Heads of State, held in Abuja from 16 to 17 of February this year, the heads of state encouraged a trans-regional collaborative engagement towards ensuring maritime safety and security in the region. And they directly ordered us to collaborate and cooperate with the ECAS region, which was a little ahead in the management of maritime assets and fighting the challenges of security. We are disposed to cooperating with other members or other regions to improve on this aspiration. Our cooperation are geared towards achieving desirable cooperative engagement mechanisms among states. This is aimed at significantly reducing the margins of conflicts, tensions, and disagreements to improve maritime security. However, available data, again a weakness, on emerging threats in the Gulf of Guinea indicates a rising maritime threat in Nigeria, Cameroon, and Benin maritime corridors, which require concerted effort to tackle. The scourge of insecurity made ECAS to develop a robust maritime security strategy in 2008. The strategy is hinged on structuring the coastal states into 3 operational zones, namely A, B, and Z, and D. The Zone D member states comprise Gabon, Sao Tome and Principe, and Equatorial Guinea and Cameroon. The Zone D is contiguous to ECOWAS through the maritime domain of Nigeria. And the success of the ECAS collective security mechanism has led to a decline in piracy and other illicit maritime activities in ECAS sub-region. The consequence is the increase of maritime insecurity in our region. And it goes to confirm the assertion that he made, that maritime insecurity problems cannot be fought from one front. It needs collaborative efforts to fill in all the gaps so that we can deal with the pirates. The pirates may not be that much or with so many sea assets, but they operate using the knowledge on the sea and the gaps in our own patrols to destroy or attack us. The collaborative effort is therefore to be emphasized. Luckily, our gaps in the region can be more or less controlled by the United States African Command, which is deployed, and the European Union members to intervene through various initiatives towards improving cooperation at political and operational levels. However, the evolving ECOWAS maritime security strategy is addressing the gap limitations through a proposed operational structure consisting of E, F, and G groups. It was only recently that the maritime meeting of the proposed first pilot model, Zone E, Benin, Nigeria, Niger, and Togo, was held in Lomé. The proposed model is based on the experience of Operation Prosperity, initiated between Nigeria and Cameroon in September 2011. We are doing something, but we need to expand on what we have begun by cooperating with our brothers. Let me briefly enumerate the challenges that we face in these endeavors. Lack of maritime domain awareness in the region among our people is very high. Lack of adequate platforms for patrols in the Gulf of Guinea is a reality. Lack of political will to invest in maritime assets is a big challenge. And inadequate funding, which confronts us, like in many other aspects of the regional security efforts. But there are prospects for improved maritime security in the region. Because we believe that the prospects of a secure maritime domain will lead to political stability and economic prosperity in the Gulf of Guinea. What is happening in the Sahel can be linked to maritime gaps in the south. Drug trafficking, the planes who cannot land somewhere near the Sahel in Mali, Bamako, or Niger would like to use the sea lanes because they have a collaborative agreement with the littoral states for the shipment of their goods that arrive at the region. And who knows whether one or two containers that could be checked may not carry all the cocaine and marijuana that they want to pass through the desert to Europe. So what about formulation of a maritime security strategy for the Gulf of Guinea? The formation of a framework for maritime security strategy for the Gulf of Guinea is considered the first step towards effectively and efficiently combating the multifaceted nature of the threats identified and the various challenges faced in the Gulf of Guinea. The holistic approach of ECOWAS and ECAS and the Gulf of Guinea countries' maritime security is to bring out a strategy that will be most welcome. Accordingly, the maritime security framework will need to be based on some strategic considerations as follows: the efficacy of the operationalized structure, the efficient and effective deployment of trained maritime experts. Do we have enough? Maybe not. Deployment of necessary maritime security assets by the ECOWAS region in the proposed zones E, F, and G, and sustenance of zones A, B, and D by ECAS. A provision of adequate logistics and operational requirements. Against the backdrop of the various threats and challenges to maritime security in the Gulf of Guinea, as well as the inadequacies in the capabilities of the naval and coastal forces of the state in the region, putting in place appropriate maritime security strategies become very crucial. Among such strategies are development of capacity for maritime domain awareness, provision of adequate maritime assets for the protection of the Gulf of Guinea, removal of diplomatic obstacles associated with claims of sovereignty and joint training. Others are collaborative funding, maritime space legislation, and promotion of international diplomatic pressure on illegal, unregulated, and unprotected fishing in the region. He said something about diplomatic access. Yes, we are sensitive about that. But for us in the region, because we have a protocol on collective security, it should not be a problem when we have to negate the diplomatic controls. We have done that in a few protocols, and we hope to thrive on that. Okay, thank you. Let us see how we can improve on maritime domain awareness. The need for appropriate structures for the provision of situational awareness could be achieved by providing the necessary technology and technological-based equipment for detection, monitoring, and assessment of threat situations within the Gulf of Guinea maritime zone. We need early detection and reporting of illegal or suspicious activities in the Gulf of Guinea maritime domain. And to this end, the establishment of a regional maritime domain awareness center. I think you have something like that. Equipped with an integrated satellite-based automated identification system, coastal radar system, and the coastlines of all member states will be a welcome idea. I talked earlier on about funding gaps. If we are to survive and establish something like this within the region, we need to have collaborative funding effort from our partners after we have exhausted our own internal capacities. Provision of adequate and appropriate maritime security assets. Various governments within our region need concerted effort to invest in maritime security by acquiring adequate, appropriate platforms and logistic support for maritime security. These are necessary tools for enforcement of maritime security. And here we are saying rather, removal of diplomatic obstacles associated with claims of sovereignty. Another impending obstacle is a claim of sovereignty. Consideration to stability is vital in view of most challenges to stability, and we are prepared to discuss and negotiate. I've talked about collaborative funding already. As we are fighting the land crisis, I think we are not that endowed with maritime knowledge to see how the two can be balanced. I must say that we are obviously biased towards the land problems more than the sea problems. And that could be inherited from our background. We also need, above all, to cast all these in a maritime space legislation, which I don't think we will lack the expertise to do that. To end, I wish to once more thank you and your government for the noble initiatives you are pursuing. Equally appreciated is the seized opportunities to put us together, to learn from each other, and to know that in maritime quest for security, one cannot act alone. I did not take part in the Perth arrangement, but this has been an eye-opener for me. I remain ever grateful to you. I'll report back to my boss. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Charles. Our final panelist, and then we have a Q&A session, is Alan Cole, and we have to have a special arrangement for Alan, given the seating here. Alan has been heading or running the counter-piracy program in the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, I think, for 3 years. Prior to that, had a long time, 18 years, in the UK Royal Navy, and has served in particular as a senior military lawyer in a number of operations, including to the commander of UK forces in Iran and Iraq, in Iraq and Afghanistan. Also served as legal advisor to coalition maritime forces based in Bahrain, a lot of operational experience in the Gulf and the North Indian Ocean. Since joining UNODC in particular, his work has included the establishment of programs in Kenya, Seychelles, Mauritius, Tanzania, to support their criminal justice systems with how you go about investigating and prosecuting persons suspected of piracy. So we've asked Alan if he could talk a little bit about the role of the office, the current work to address piracy off the Horn of Africa, as well as plans to provide support to West Africa. Alan, please.
Thank you very much for the invitation and for the time. As you hear, I'm going to talk about the work that the United Nations has done so far. I'm also going to be very brief. That's not because the United Nations hasn't done a lot of very important work so far, but there may be some ideas in this room that we've missed. So the sooner that we stop talking and you start, then I'm sure we'll find new ideas. Firstly, a thank you for both this event and the Perth event. As it was put so well at the beginning, it really has given those of us who are very focused on piracy in a particular region in the world the opportunity to raise our eyes to the horizon. Apparently, good leaders and planners spend about a third of their time planning more than 2 years ahead. Without the Australians provoking us to meetings like this, I wouldn't spend any of my time planning more than 2 years ahead, so I'm very grateful for that opportunity. So what are we doing? Many UN agencies working in this area, but none with a larger or busier programme probably than UNODC. But I will draw attention to the work particularly of UNPOS and the Department of Political affairs in piracy, and also UNDP on their work in Somalia. UNODC's work centres really around helping the regional states that are taking on piracy with the criminal justice processes associated with that. And huge credit must particularly go to Seychelles. No country in the world is doing more to address Somali piracy, and their role so far has really been heroic, and it's a great privilege to be working with them. The work we've done with the police, the courts, the prosecutors and the prisons has helped to ensure fair and efficient trials. We fund defence lawyers, we provide interpretation and so on. And also work in the prisons area to make sure that those who are sentenced to periods of imprisonment do end up serving those terms of imprisonment. We're very pleased that there's never been a piracy trial in Kenya or Seychelles or Tanzania that's failed due to poor police work or prosecution work. And in the case of the police, that is largely due to the impact that Australia has had by deploying Australian federal policemen to our programme over the last 3 years. After we've seen fair and efficient trials in Somalia, we work hard to get the pirates back to serve their prison centres at home in Somalia. Although Seychelles is a hugely popular tourist destination, I recommend it to any of you. You shouldn't be deterred by piracy. There is one group of individuals, 100 or so, at Montinposse prison in Seychelles who are desperately keen to get home at the end of their stay in Seychelles, and we're doing everything we can to make sure that we get them home as quickly as possible to where they should be. Piracy in Somalia has begun to come down, which has got to be a good thing. But the commander of the European Union Naval Forces described that trend as fragile and reversible, and I think that's right. I also think that without the private security companies at sea, who bring with them their own problems in terms of the regulation of their use of force, and without the extraordinarily high and expensive level of naval activity, things will be very much worse. And if either of those two drivers is taken away, I think we'll quickly see piracy come back. The issue of hostages was touched on, and I want to touch on that myself very briefly. We are now running a programme to try and look after some of the hostages in Somalia, as well as 2 from Seychelles who've been held for nearly a year now. There are another 177 held at sea and some 70 on land who've been abandoned by the hostages, the pirates that took them, and now have to be returned home, and that can be extremely difficult work. But I'm pleased to be able to tell Mr. Jennings that we have made some progress on that now, and with the help of UNPOS, we're developing a programme to see what we can do to get support to them, and particularly to get them home when they're released. So, what are the key differences then between piracy in Somalia and piracy in West Africa? Well, it seems to me we could look at the trends as one position, that the trends in Somalia are very much coming down, while those in West Africa are regrettably rising sharply, where we were in Somalia probably 2 or 3 years ago. Also, another key difference which affects the way that we deal with this, that in Somalia there's no capability to unload the cargoes from the ships that are taken, so they're always returned with the cargoes intact. That could be oil. In one case it was a ship full of tanks, and I'm sure it's extremely frustrating for the pirates that they had no way of unloading all those tanks, so they could pay their own part in the future stability of Somalia. But it wasn't to be, whereas in West Africa we very much see the stealing of cargoes and its onward sail. And also the economic effect is very different. Some would say that the economic effect on Somalia, as the main country in the region affected by piracy, is a positive one, whereas that's clearly not the case for the countries in West Africa who suffer terribly as a result of this. The impact on them is much more akin to that you see on Seychelles, with huge impacts on countries with quite a narrow range of industries from which they raise foreign currency. And my final point is what can be transferred from the experience in Somalia to what's happening in West Africa. Minister Faure mentioned the RAPIC, the Regional Anti-Piracy Prosecution Investigation Coordination Centre. That is potentially a hugely important development, allowing regional authorities and international agencies to put together prosecution packages, which then can be brought to bear on some of the people who are making huge amounts of money out of this. And who aren't currently passing through the criminal justice systems in the region, or anywhere else for that matter. Also, General Okai mentioned the requirement for greater regional cooperation. Certainly there's very close cooperation between the EU naval forces, coalition maritime forces and NATO, and the authorities in the Seychelles. But Operation Prosperity in the Gulf of Guinea perhaps provides a model for the future. The creation of a clear focal point is extremely important. One of the, and mentioned by Lieutenant Colonel Tiao, One of the great successes, I think, of the response to piracy off Somalia has been the contact group on the piracy off the coast of Somalia, and seeing some mimic of that in the Gulf of Guinea may well be the way that we want to go. One of the reasons that the contact group has been very successful, and some would say in sharp contrast to some UN agencies, is that they can flex the resources that they deploy according to what is required, move into different areas. And perhaps the critical difference from a UN agency is that when there's no more requirement for the contact group on piracy, it quietly goes away. So that sort of flexible international response may be the model we want to follow in West Africa. And finally, we need to have a general understanding of the impact that the pirates have in the wider criminal environment. If you have a copy of this brochure that we have, in the back of it we show 1,200 young Somali men now held in 21 states around the world, about 2/3 of whom we are working with to assist the prosecution process. They're not all full-time pirates. Many of them move between different crimes as the opportunity takes them. And many of them have pleaded in their defence in court, particularly in Kenya. I'm not a pirate, I'm a people trafficker, knowing full well that the Kenyans can't prosecute people trafficking, it not being a crime of universal jurisdiction. And the final thought I want to leave you with, as we see the success of AMISOM in southern Somalia and the pushing north of al-Shabaab, at the same time we're seeing some effective counter-piracy offers activities in Puntland, which are seeing the pirates pushed south. And the result of that is we're quickly seeing a co-location of al-Shabaab and pirates in Galmudug, an area between the two regions, which we need to face up to. Al-Shabaab have now lost their principal funding source, which was the port of Kismayo. They can no longer export charcoal from there and smuggle sugar in, and they're looking for another way of raising foreign currency, and they find themselves co-located with most of Somali's pirates. I'll leave you with that thought. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you very much, Alan. I think now we move to the interactive part of our morning with questions and answers. We may take a few questions in one go and then ask any of our panellists who want to respond to do so, and that will include Alan, of course, as well. So if people could identify themselves there as well when you speak, there are roaming microphones, and I think Permanent Representative of Somalia first. Elmi, please.
I'm Dr. Duale, Elmi Duale, Ambassador of Somalia. And first of all, let me thank, with a great appreciation, the convening of this workshop, that is Ambassador Zinzu and Ambassador Quinlan, and also thank the distinguished panelists for giving us a real good background of piracy in the three areas: Asia, Gulf of Guinea, and Somalia. Now, as you know, Somalia is, you see the figures there, not only because of the ransoms they got and the millions spent, both to free the ships, but also in the high seas for the naval costs and so on. There is a great cost, of course, of humanity. Those who have been hijacked and who are now, some of them are still, for the last 2 years, have not been released by the pirates. Now, I think the causes have been mentioned. The major one was that the breakdown of security inland in Somalia. Weak governance, no security, and therefore this security, of course, also caused the insecurity in the seas, in the high seas. Plus, young people who have no jobs and who have no other way of earning something. And because of the violence that was inland, they had to go out with their guns, Kalashnikovs and so on, and try their luck at the high seas. But because it became so lucrative that others joined them. And because nobody can control our coast on land, it was difficult for everybody to manage this curse. I see the international community has tried and have made a good job. As you could see, the numbers of hijackings also went down. But still, if you take the whole areas, still Somalia's pirates cause about 50%, nearly 50% of all piracy at sea. Of course, then the criminal elements and organized criminal elements joined them. So they become more sophisticated. The solutions have been prospected, and the last speaker here also has shown the progress made, especially in the legal aspects of taking them to court and then imprisonment, returning them to Somalia. I think the Seychelles have done a good job and are doing a good job. Mauritius is also doing some. Kenya, of course, but Kenya has other problems, and it's not easy for them to as it is. There are a lot of controversies of who is a pirate and who is not a pirate. So that's a difficult issue. So I hope now everybody understands that as the causes of piracy are could be mainly contained inland. A new government is now a new president has been elected, a new foreign minister, a new prime minister has been appointed, and soon we hope to have a government that can then manage the issues which have been mentioned against piracy. However, without good security and supporting the establishment of Somali national security, whether in the maritime areas or inland, I believe we still will have some problems. Thank you.
Hilmi, thank you.
Thank you. My name is Arild Wegner from Norway, currently with the Norwegian Embassy in Washington, and previously a substantial number of years been in the maritime industry, working not least on maritime security. So much for my own background. I would like to, with your permission, I would like to ask Secretary Four how he reads the sharp decline in piracy off the Horn of Africa. It's already been touched upon. But we read and hear different interpretations. Media outlets have reported from Somaliland itself that the number of the pirate communities actually are in a state of total disintegration. And others would disagree with that, say they're just holding their horses in the hope that the maritime forces will sooner or later go back home again so they can resume their business. So how do you read that situation, sir? And by the way, from one small country to another, Norway accounts for some 5% of the total traffic in the area off the Horn of Africa. And so I would like to take this opportunity to commend the Seychelles for its extensive contributions to the fight to the combat of piracy in that area. So thank you very much for that. It's very impressive.
Thank you. It's good that I'm speaking after the Norwegian because we no longer hear of the Norwegian Vikings. If you look at the UNDP Human Development Report, you'll find that most of the countries that are linked to Norway or that are friends of Norway have got a GDP well over $40,000 per annum. Whereas the countries that produce pirates have got well below $2,000 per annum. So although Jennings did talk of 10 lessons from the Perth conference, he did in the 10th lesson establish a link between structural problems and the normative problems by arresting and prosecuting pirates. We are only addressing the structural problems. We are not addressing the normative problems. These normative problems, as illustrated by Theo, General Charles, and to some extent, Alan Cole, do point out that there's a link, as the ambassador of Somalia said, there's a link between poverty and piracy. There's a very strong link between poverty and piracy. And there's therefore a strong link between countries that are able to enforce measures against piracy and the countries that are not very well able to enforce measures against piracy. All these, both camps are linked by either wealth or poverty. So I think in the course of addressing the problems of piracy, we also need to address the normative problems so that these people, as Alan Cole said, do not move from one profession which gives them more opportunities, which gives them less opportunities, I would say, to an occupation that would give them more possibilities, although with much risky at sea. So if we solve the problem of poverty, I think we would also solve the problem of piracy in the longer term. If you look at the profile of these pirates, very few of them have got a GDP of world average of $10,000 per annum. Very, very few, if any. But most of them have got a GDP of less than $10,000 per annum. I thank you.
Yes, just put here, and then we'll have some answers.
Please stand. Thank you. My name is Benjamin Merem. I work for the Global Policy Forum. Mr. Jennings and Mr. Cole, you both mentioned the increasing role of private security and military companies. And I was wondering, to what extent can those companies, private companies, really be part of the solution? And how can we manage to integrate them in the establishment of legal frameworks for the future? Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. I would like to refer to the question that was put to me by the Honourable Representative of the Royal Norwegian Embassy, which is a country that we're also trying to emulate because it has a very good structure that it has put in place to organize the revenues it earns from the petroleum industry, the Norwegian Trust Fund. It's a very good model. In Seychelles, we're also trying to hit the gold as well. We're still in the initial phases. So there's this is also an announcement that I'm making today, that we are exploring for.
This is black gold.
For oil. And we hope that we do not have the problems eventually if we do strike gold that the Gulf of Guinea is experiencing. I think there are various reasons why there has been a reduction in the number of attacks or successful attacks off the coast of Somalia. First, there has been the response by the countries of the region and by the international community as well to ensure that this vast areas is covered as much as possible. It's not easy. The pirates can easily find their prey without being spotted. But over the years, the international community has found I think the right military or naval strategies in order to contain as much as possible the pirates. Secondly, it's the shipping industry itself that has responded by putting in place the right measures, the best management practices, basically, to counter piracy. Thirdly, I think it's also the fact that the pirates themselves have been dealt a hard blow in many ways, and lately the EUNAVFOR have also moved on land as well by destroying, as you mentioned, their bases, and in doing so, I think they have countered successfully the pirates. So it's a number of factors. There's also the fact that some countries in the region have strengthened their criminal justice system. We have been arresting the pirates. We have been prosecuting them. They have been successfully prosecuted. They have been imprisoned. A number of them are being transferred back to Somalia with the cooperation of the international community, the United Nations, the UNODC in particular, and in collaboration with some other countries. So it's a combination of factors. But I think it doesn't mean that it has stopped. We need to continue with these measures and to intensify as much as possible. It is easy, so easy for us to say, okay, we've succeeded, and the result would be that it would recur and in strength.
Any additional comment? Any of those questions?
Okay. Gary, just quickly, I think it's undeniable that there is a link between poverty and piracy. Absolutely no question whatsoever. Complicated, though, because of the involvement of...
you might just press your microphone.
Sorry, I'll start that again. I think it's undeniable that there is a link between poverty and piracy. That is undeniable, particularly for the foot soldiers, perhaps the foot sailors that are commissioning acts of crime at sea. But it is complicated because of the involvement of organised crime, which I think in some cases it's clear that what we see are well-funded criminal organisations undertaking this task, possibly able to exploit poor communities, communities that don't have other sources of employment. So a complicated mix between poverty and organised crime. On the question of private companies, are they part of the solution? Well, the answer to that is, in practical terms, yes, they are, because we see them being used significantly by private shipping firms on their vessels. However, very complicated legal implications flow from the use of private security, and I think what we need to think about here is appropriate means to regulate this activity in ways which give us more confidence about the operations of private security within international legal frameworks.
Thank you, Peter. Conscious of the time, we've only really got about another 10 minutes, I think. So, and Peter is going to provide us with a short wrapping up of where the discussion got to this morning. But are there any additional questions that? Indeed. Okay, Tete, please.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. My name is Tete Antonio. I am the permanent observer of the African Union to the UN. I actually don't have a question to ask. However, some comments on some ideas which I think we need to develop. First, I would like to thank Benin, Australia, and the IPI for organizing this meeting. I think it is a very important one for the reasons maybe Mr. General Oke has already stated. We are dealing with very important regions of our continent, African continent. I mean, if you talk about Somalia, it is a question on our highlights every day. You talk about Seychelles, was our pride for tourism in Africa. You talk about the Gulf of Guinea. This is one of the richest regions of the globe. So you talk about very important parts of the African continent. But now I do come back to the statement made by Jennings when he spoke about regional arrangements. I think it is a very important statement, whereas the region should play a role in order to be the first to get to have interests on the sea. There is a awareness in the continent, as Mr. General Oke already said. In the framework of the African Union, we organized meetings in Durban in 2009, and a workshop was held in Addis Ababa as well in 2010. And the decision even was taken as well by the Summit of the African Union, whereas the heads of states called for the elaboration of a continental strategy, even involving the continental strategy to master the maritime domain, not only but also to protect it, even involving the African standby force when it comes to protection and safety and security of the maritime domain. But now, I think one of the issues we did raise the question of piracy. There is also awareness in the continent. I do remember in my previous life as a diplomat of my country, I happened to be involved in this dossier of Zone of Peace and Cooperation of South Atlantic, whereas the delegation of Nigeria was, I think, the most eloquent at the time on the question of piracy because of the experience in the country. Although some of the delegations, I should confess, didn't pay much attention because it was before Somalia's problems. But now we face it. And I think the awareness is there and was there since. But what we're trying to say is also to have maybe a very comprehensive strategy. If you listen to General Oke, he was insistingly speaking about the knowledge of the sea. So let's not look at the sea only when it is threatened. We should look at the sea as a very vital environment for our lives, not only in terms of safety, but in terms of the economic gains of the sea is not only the oil, which we tend to look at, is not only the fish we take from the sea, but there are various wealth in the sea on which we need to raise the awareness of our countries. But the sea is very vital to us. So once you have interest on something, then you will protect it better. But I think we need to develop this strategy as a very comprehensive one. There were ideas still on this area of zone of peace and cooperation of South Atlantic, of even cooperation between institutes of research. The institutes of research on the sea, which are in some of the countries, are at the very beginning stage. I think we can also raise the cooperation between institutes of research so that people can master the sea, they can know the good of the sea. It is not only economic wealth, it is also a way for cooperation. You don't need to build a road or a railway to go from South Africa to Nigeria. If you have good ships on the sea, you will travel by the sea without making so much effort, maybe of let's say dérober les montagnes, comme vous dites en français. I mean, you don't have to remove mountains to reach Nigeria coming from South Africa by the sea. So there is a lot of a need for a comprehensive strategy. Let's not look at the sea only when it's threatened, but we should look at it as a way of life, as a source of life as well. I think on piracy, still, generally you spoke about the drug trafficking as well as Colin. There is a need of also a comprehensive one. I think in Somalia, one of the questions which the African Union had been raising since the beginning, that the pirates were not born on the sea; they were born on land. So do we have to tackle the land first very well before we go to the sea? I think in Somalia, we hope this with the piracy will also suffer from the gain of peace in this very important country for our continent. Now, on the Gulf of Guinea, you face Latin America. I think there is a need also to extend this cooperation to where the drug comes from. Let's only look at where they land, but where do they come from to come to Africa and to go to Europe or to be consumed in Africa? I think we need also to reinforce the mechanism existing between the African continent and our sisters and brothers in the overside of America. If I took long to speak, but I think you understand. But it is I embody 54 countries, so I can speak more than one individual country. Thank you.
Tete, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. My name is Hussein Shah from the Mission of Egypt. I join previous speakers in thanking you for organizing this event, and of course thanking our panelists for their comprehensive presentation. I have a couple of comments. First, of course, we are pleased with the political and security developments in Somalia, and we believe it will affect combating piracy of the coast of Somalia. I take the word from Ambassador Zenso that the ultimate goal is to eliminate piracy altogether. And also, I mean the recommendation that was mentioned by Mr. Peter, that we need to end the catch and release model. Of the coast of Somalia, we have some experience, I think, as mentioned by the distinguished representative of Seychelles. I mean, we have the transfer agreements between some countries, including Seychelles and the Somali governments, and also the regions, Puntland and Somaliland. So my question, are there any similar experiences in the Gulf of Guinea and also in Southwest Asia? At the same time, do you think that the provisions of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, they provide adequate legal instruments to address this problem globally? I mean, so far we are talking about coordination at the regional level. Do you think that what we're having so far, which is UNCLOS, is enough, I mean, to address this problem globally, or we need more and additional legal instruments in order to tackle the problem of piracy from a global perspective? Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
Senior Captain Zhang Bing from Chinese Mission. First, I would like to thanks to ambassadors and Mr. Hodge for hosting the event, and the panelists for your illuminating briefing. I would also like to thank your Ambassador Zhu So, Your Excellency, for your appreciation to Chinese government among other countries in our effort to counter piracy. As a naval officer, I understand it is common practice to carry out literal combat operations when addressing counter piracy issues. But sometimes it's not enough. The limitation is obvious. You cannot get rid of the sources on sea regarding the piracy. So the inland operation is necessary and also sometimes crucial in addressing this issue. Recently, I think Amazon successfully launched operations as part of a counter-piracy effort. Kenyan forces now secure the port of Kismayo. Also, I think it's part of, it will be beneficial to counter-piracy in that region. My question is, the inland operation regarding counter-piracy is a sensitive and also complicated issue. It has something to do with the security, the mandate of Security Council, and also the national, I mean the consent of the host country, the national sovereignty, those and the jurisdiction issues. So it's very complicated. So, Mr. Janice, my question is, how do you think to address those issues to bridge the gaps, among those sensitive issues? Thank you.
Colonel Omar Al-Kadir, I am the military advisor of Morocco. First of all, I would like to thank IPI for convening this meeting. I would like to thank you, Excellencies, Ambassador of Australia and Benin. I also would like to thank the distinguished panelists for their very insightful presentation of this morning that cleared us on the issue of piracy at sea. Piracy is not a new phenomenon. Piracy did exist since quite time. Today, piracy is important because 80% of the world trade is made by sea. And I join my colleague who raised the question of poverty. Yes, why piracy does not exist along the coast of San Francisco or Los Angeles? Why does not piracy exist in close to Tokyo or to London? And Mr. Peter, you have raised or answered the question by saying that it's linked, yes, to poverty and to some other factors like organized crimes. In my knowledge, I was taught that when we address a problem, we have to address the whole factors involved in the phenomena. And you have well covered the corrective and preventive measures taken to address the piracy. But did we address the root causes, the main causes that lead the whole community to the piracy at sea? Yes, poverty is one of the factors, but we need to address the other ones. So if we do not take a global or systemic approach to address the rest of the factors, I think the problem will stay and will last for longer. Thank you.
Any of our panelists who might, including Alan, who might want to take up any of those points, and then we'll proceed to your summary, Peter.
Well, just very quickly, because the question was directly asked to me by the senior colonel about operations on land, and really all I can say is that I think these present formidably difficult obstacles for countries which are considering how to conduct such operations. I referred to earlier observations from Nicholas Teo about the importance of respecting the sovereignty of all countries involved in the process, and I think that that does present a significant barrier to onshore operations. Clearly, another one, in a practical sense, is targeting. How does one effectively target people who are considered to be pirates, who are themselves part of a wider community? Frankly, I think that although there is a sort of initial sense of attraction to the idea of being able to take the fight on shore, in practical terms, I think it's extremely difficult, and we're unlikely to see it being applied very often.
Yes, thank you. I am Amit Singhal from Department of Political Affairs. Just adding to what Peter has said, the first Security Council resolution 1816 that authorized action in the waters of Somalia, that, and I quote from the resolution, that Security Council took note of the letter from Permanent Representative of the Somali Republic to the United Nations to the President of the Security Council dated 27th February 2008, conveying the consent of the TFG to the Security Council for urgent assistance in securing the territorial and international waters of the coast of Somalia for the safe conduct of shipping and navigation. Adding further, Resolution 1851 that authorized further actions. The Security Council took note from the TFG, including the letter of 9th December 2008 from the President of Somalia, requesting the international community to assist the TFG in taking all necessary measures to interdict those who use Somali territory and airspace to plan, facilitate, or undertake acts of piracy and armed robbery at sea. That's it from my side. Thank you.
We may proceed to a very, very brief summing up, I think, by Peter. Oh, Alan, on the UNCLOS or anything. Yes, please.
A quick answer to the question from Egypt. Well, two parts to it. The first one on prisoner transfers. Do we anticipate those in West Africa? I think not. The particular circumstances in East Africa are that Somalis are being prosecuted and tried in countries that are not their own and transferred back to serve their prison sentences. The expectation in West Africa is that the suspected pirates will be prosecuted in their own countries. And the second part, does UNCLOS provide a viable legal basis for piracy prosecutions? Yes, it does. Thank you.
Peter.
Well, this is the hard part, isn't it? Very quickly, let me just point to, I think, some of the highlights which emerged from our discussions over the last few hours. My first point is to say I think that what you see is the enormously demanding effort, the patient diplomacy, the gritty, detailed work that's necessary to put together appropriate national and regional and international strategies to deal with counter-piracy. The second point I would make is about the essentiality of building trust and capability between and within the countries affected by the problem. And we've seen a number of examples of the value of creating focal points for coordination to make a practical operational difference in counter-piracy strategies. There have been a number of comments from the panel and from the floor about the importance of strengthening and mainstreaming oceanic governance, which I do think is the right strategic lens through which to think about counter-piracy. And there have also been a number of comments about the importance of securing political will in order to affect meaningful change in this area. One practical solution or suggestion which I think is worth considering is whether or not the contact group model on Somalia is an appropriate model for West African counter-piracy strategies, and that's something that should be further thought about. I think also there have been a couple of comments which point to the risk of complacency, because we do see a tailing off in numbers of recent attacks. We can't assume that that is a permanent trend, and indeed the successes of the last few years are rather fragile and can be reversed if the attention of the international community moves away. I think a challenge that we will have to consider at some point in the future is a reduction of overall naval maritime presence in the Indian Ocean, simply because of the cost of maintaining that presence. It may not be there forever. Let me end with a comment that Gary Quinlan made, which I think for me is music to my ears, but does also suggest a way forward in terms of future cooperation. Gary talked about the need for a more structured UN Security Council approach to maritime security. I do believe that is the right context in which to think about future international efforts in the counter-piracy space. I do hope that we will have an opportunity to pursue that agenda in coming years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Could I invite any of the panellists who might want to make any concluding comments at all? Nicholas? Yeah.
Well, I think much of the attention has been given more to the problems in the Somalian nation side. I think what I basically like to address is that the nature of piracy is always evolving. It has changed from petty thefts to shipboarding to taking of crew. But I think at the end of the day, what we would like to make sure is that the risk versus the reward are not overwhelming. If the reward always seems to be the lesser of two evils, and the risk is tilt, then you'll find that it will just flourish. So what we have been addressing in the Asia part is to make sure that the rewards, as in a successful attempt, has been addressed, then it will actually complicate and bring the numbers down. Of course, this is a cat and mouse issue. When the policeman is in the area, they will move on to another area. But at the end of the day, what we are trying to prevent here is to make sure that it do not becomes a successful business model. While it can be a good career, a third career option for some, we make sure that whichever case of thing, we address it where the problem is. And this is where, if you look at the recap report, we do not term all as piracy, but what we do is that we break it down into category 1, 2, and 3, where category 1 is the highest, that means in the case of violence, in case of the economic loss is highest, versus petty thefts, so that countries that have very limited resources can channel it to where it matters most, and then you tackle it down slope. I think it's impossible to be successful overnight, that every one of the problems is addressed. So we look at it from this category and prioritize where are the most that require the immediate attention that we addressed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that by the end of my presentation, a general impression had been created that the West Africa or Gulf of Guinea maritime security problem is so enormous that we had become hopeless or helpless. I wish to assure the audience that since Benin took the matter up at the UN, the local authorities in West Africa have seized the challenge and are very seized on finding a solution to the problem. I must say that we have a very high technical committee on security, which advises the Mediation and Security Council in our protocol, who in turn advise the heads of state. And that is the Committee of Chiefs of Defense Staff. They meet regularly, and on this Malian issue, for instance, they have met 9 times in extraordinary meetings since February. They had discussed this Gulf of Guinea insecurity prior to Benin's action, and they have formed a subcommittee of that committee to go deep into the problem and make some recommendations. And these are taking place with encouraging progress. I think the heads of states themselves have been made aware that they will have to commit a substantial part of their community levies to create a special fund to support Gulf of Guinea operations. They have also been alerted that their navies have to be boosted. And I know my own country, Ghana, recently has received some support from some EU members. So by the middle of next year, I believe all the arrangements for a better management of the security, on the maritime security, will be in place. We already have some assets. Senegal, Ghana, Nigeria can float some maritime platforms that can deal with these people. I don't think the pirates in the sub-region are that sophisticated. They are opportunists. But if we don't nip the situation, the situation early, they may grow arrogant and become big-time pirates. So let me leave this impression with you before we leave here. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I would just like to conclude on my side by thanking the Australian and the Benin governments for having organized this conference as a follow-up, this workshop, as a follow-up to the Perth Counter-Piracy Conference, because I think there is a need for us to continue to look for ways and means of tackling piracy so that it is eliminated. And there are so many good ideas that every region has, which could be shared to improve the work that we are doing. I will be leaving this workshop with ideas on how we can better do things in our own region, for instance. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Excellencies, dear colleagues, panelists, I would like to thank you very much. My dear friend, Peter Jennings, the Executive Director of the Strategic Policy Institute, for the work done here, for the summary which he provided. We acquired a broad view of the achievements of the regions which are doing well in the fight against piracy, and also the extent of the challenges facing the Gulf of Guinea region. And we need to move swiftly to be able to control rapidly the deteriorating situation in West Africa, which we see is all connected with the situation in the Gulf of Guinea. It's very good that we are now aware of the linkages and between the situation in the Sahel and the Gulf of Guinea situation, and the need, aware of the need of having a comprehensive approach. And as you know, the Secretary General has just appointed a new special envoy for the Sahel, and I think that we have to develop a comprehensive approach. That's why, when I was preparing the resolutions, I involved hinterland countries in the preparation of the work, because they stand also to benefit from securing the routes of, so to say, supply for them. And we need to address also the issues of capacity building in the region, and to promote stability. We stand to take advantage of, so to say, growing awareness of the challenges, but also of the opportunities that the sea can bring to us. And we saw clearly what it takes to be successful. It takes a lot of organization, and it takes a lot of coordination. And we really stand to benefit from the lesson from Southeast Asia in that field. The structural aspect of it is crucial for us. And as the General said, and nobody can do it alone. And we working very strongly to have a system in place, and we call on the international community to support the efforts of the governments of the region to secure the region, so that the riches of the region does not become, so to say, resource curse as in other parts of Africa. And the whole international community stands to benefit from that. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. It remains for me, we're a little over time, so I apologise for that, but I think it's because people were caught up and involved in today's discussion, so that's excellent. I want to thank our panellists, of course, for being available and being prepared to come, in some cases at fairly short notice when one or two others were unable to make it. I also want to thank all of you for your participation today. There will be a summary of the workshop which we will distribute early next week, so this will perhaps draw a few of the lessons together that Peter and Jean-Francis and others have mentioned in the last few minutes as well. I'll conclude by saying Australia, of course, is an Indian Ocean country, not just a Pacific country, so we do pay quite a lot of attention on what happens in the Indian Ocean, and that will always continue to be the case. So that partly explains, or explains by large measure, I have to say, what our own direct involvement on anti-piracy activities and operations is. I mean, we have a major fleet in the combined unit, and we have Australian Federal Police working in some of the countries of Africa and elsewhere, not only in the African region, dealing with transnational crime, but particularly also focusing at the moment in relation to piracy. Both investigation and prosecutions and those sorts of deployments will obviously continue. We'll also be continuing to support the sort of training activity, but also the work through capacity building workshops, but also through other workshops to inject some input locally into the development of these strategies that need to be developed, and particularly to meet some of the requirements of Security Council in relation to those through ECOWAS and ECAS and others in the Gulf of Guinea Commission. So that's that commitment is there, and we look forward to continuing to work with IPI on this as well. So we've now had 9-10 activities on piracy, so we look forward to the 11th. Yes, okay. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you.